Hi, Decoders. This week we are back with our series on unraveling into authenticity. Authenticity! This week we're talking with a very dear friend of ours about life-altering insights. Hi, I'm Kiran Trace. Welcome to Humans Decoded, a story of hobbits, fairies, elves, dwarfs, gnomes, and humans. If you get lost at any point, there is a deep dive on all the different avatars in episode 1. It includes notes. Thank you for joining us in a fun little chat about the vast potential of our human makeup. Hi, Leela.
Hey, Kiran.
You know, our lovely Cami fairy is away this week, so we thought it was a perfect opportunity to invite our special friend, Anthony, little special guest, who's not only a decoder, but is a fairy. So it's like, in the absence of a fairy, we found a fairy.
Absolutely. It's essential to have one fairy, at least one, in the mix. And you know, I know Anthony since a couple of years, but I've never heard his full story in a way, so I can't wait to discover it along the way with you all in this episode. And Anthony Little is a physician. He's a long-time decoder. He's a longer-time fairy, and he began listening to the Humans Decoded podcast back in 2023, shortly after moving to Hawaii, as I learned how it's pronounced recently, for a new position at the hospital there. And he came into the Kiran Trace community classes about a year later. And since recognizing himself in the fairy avatar blueprint and working with the Kiran Trace tools, there's been so much emergence of his authenticity. And what we're excited to hear about is how that unfolds in his career, in relationships, in daily life, etc. So let's get into this. Hi, Anthony.
Hi, Anthony.
Hello. Hi, Kiran and Leela. I'm super excited to be here today. I've obviously been listening since the inception of the podcast, and I think I've listened to every single episode since then. So I'm really excited to be here. Long-time fan, first time interviewed.
Yay! So let's start this. Did you always know what avatar you are, or was it a bit of a journey to discover it? Like when you first heard us talk about the avatars, was it suddenly and immediately clear, like, yeah, that's me?
So I first heard about the avatars actually with the Angelo DeLullo YouTube podcast with Kiran on there. My teacher at the time was like, you should listen to this great non-dual podcast, but you should definitely skip the last 10 minutes. It's not that relevant. And it turns out the last 10 minutes where Kiran was talking about the avatars, and that's what sucked me into even just listening to the Humans Decoded podcast. But it's not immediately clear to me that I was a fairy. I would have said, just looking at that list, oh, elf. It did probably take a couple of months to be like, oh, you're really not an elf. You just have a lot of elf conditioning. And every time I heard, little fairy story or something in the podcast, it was little, almost like tears of recognition or just giggling to myself or being like, oh, interesting. I can see that in med school or med training. It's absolutely this elf world and you're just going to survive. You're going to be an elf. So it did take some time to see that fairy authenticity at first.
It's so sweet about hearing, these tears of recognition just breaking through when you hear about the little fairy quirks.
Yeah, that's what it felt like. It was a little like I had this elf versus fairy avatar in mind as I listened to those early episodes. I put kind of both against each other to a degree just to feel it in my system. It was pretty obvious I wasn't a dwarf or a gnome or something. But I would say it was really that the elf was sort of negated before the fairy was clear. And that was because I listened to what it looked like when elves are angry or elves move at the house or in their home, their diets. I was married to an elf for a while, and I was like, oh, he was for sure the elf in that relationship, not me. So that's kind of how I went about it. But I was just really almost using it as like a self-inquiry tool for a few months before it was really obvious I was a fairy.
Were there like these little light bulb moments or or like shocked moments when the truth of your real avatar became like unavoidable?
Not exactly a shock. It was more like almost like a mini return home. So, the episodes about where there's fairies and things, it was a lot about creativity and sparkles and sort of like fluttering about and being mischief makers or tricksters and all this stuff. And I was like, okay, this is starting to hit home a little more than the other avatars. I think part of that, for instance, was this like creativity aspect. And I went to really rigorous schools most of my life, including high school and college and later on medical school. And I think a lot of that creativity really got honed into kind of this academic path. But I grew up playing, piano and guitar and dancing and singing all the time. And it just kind of slowly got, I think, shamed away a bit. I guess so it was really nice to hear the fairy rhythm start to come out again. It was like, oh, these things have been in my system forever. Like, those are really obvious that I just haven't really played with them in a long time. So yeah, it was maybe a little of a shock. Oh, this is allowed. Like, this fairy system is allowed to be here. I can be this little quirky, creative person, a little trickstery, a little sparkly, all those things that I just kind of suppressed over the years.
I think so often that fairies really are underseen or underappreciated, definitely overlooked. People project on fairies that they're just not pulling their weight, or they're always in a collapse, so you can't really expect much of a fairy, or the fairy's just running in circles, they're not getting to the point. And I think it's just so profoundly challenging to fairies to live in a world where people, like what you say, like shame them for their authenticity when none of it's accurate or true or real. Like, it's so not true that fairies are not whatever it is, pulling their weight or whatever it is. And so I do think that there's such a coming home for fairies, because they've been so outcast in their authenticity, because the world is moving maybe like A, B, and fairies are going A, Z, D, M, O, S. And I think that fairies really show up differently more than any other avatar. But wow, such like powerful, incredible, creative leadership, like philosophy, like in any economics, like politics, like fairies have so much to bring to the table, and I think it's just so overlooked.
Yeah, that sounds right. And Anthony, you were talking about this creativity that really hit home for you before, and how, going to these rigorous schools and being trained as a doctor, the creativity didn't have much room. So I wonder, like, in what ways is it coming out now or showing up now?
Yeah. There's a few different ways. I think the avatar system itself kind of initially inspired me to start being a bit more creative. I did a bit of creative writing, and I've always been really into world building, kind of nerdy Dungeons and Dragons manuals and Tolkien, that sort of thing. So it started off a little bit like that. I just love it. And so I started working with Kiran as a mentor, and just on the side, there was like, oh my God, a fairy world might look like this, and or an elf world might look like this, and they might interact in this way. And so I just got to play with that initially. And of course, it was a little bit related to self-inquiry as well, and how I thought about those things. So that was one thing. But I also just started dancing a lot more, or at least dancing more at home and not just in the clubs late at night. And as kind of a creative outlet, it's a big form of exercise for me now, or a way to kind of trick myself into doing chores. If those are feeling a little crunchy, I'll just dance whenever I can't get the dishes done or laundry put away, and put on some music, and those things just kind of spontaneously get done. And at work now too, I'm frequently in charge of like the playlist in the operating room as the anesthesiologist. So it's kind of fun to just like poke and change the vibes of the operating room, kind of intentionally with the music and the playlist. If I see people are getting a little frustrated, I'll take it down a notch, maybe almost like a spa kind of music. Or if it's getting a little bit more, we need more energy, I'll make it a little bit more poppy or dancey.
You're talking about the playlist that's going on in the operating room.
Yeah, exactly. So there's like little ways to just integrate the ferry funsies, the ferry system everywhere, even little mini dance parties between cases or buying a round of silly coffee drinks for the recovery room. I think it even applies in my anesthesia chief role too, kind of allowing the ferry vibes to uplift and make this like, it's like a heavy vibe sometimes in the hospital and kind of making that feel a little bit lighter.
I think that's a really interesting point. Because a lot of times, as I said earlier, like people aren't assuming the fairy avatar is the leader. But clearly you work in a leadership position. Did that happen the more you stepped into the fairy aspect? Or like, how did that come about?
Yeah, I started to take on more of a leadership role at this hospital in Hawaii after discovering the fairy avatar for sure. Maybe at first a bit more unofficially, just kind of as a sidekick to the other chief. I had done leadership roles in med school and residency, but there was just so much effort and anxiety and probably some PTSD almost from that. So at this hospital, it really grew more organically as I started to recognize my own like authentic fairy movements. I would just unofficially kind of bounce off ideas with the chief, bringing in this bit of innovation, looking at things a little differently from how our team had operated before, how we interacted with the hospital more broadly. And I think that sort of fairy natural movement just helped bring an organic sort of cohesiveness to the crew, like kind of made it the fellowship. And so when I took over that chief role, it felt very natural to help just bring that uplifted vibe to the department and hospital. But I think it came about because I was just being more present. I was allowing myself to actually have fun, let others have fun. Always that kind of fairy prerogative. We always have to have a little bit of fun. Not being afraid to point out when the rules, the policies were kind of not working as well as we wanted. I guess I was more surprised in a sense that the other chiefs in the other departments started coming to me more often for just, questions, advice, how can we work better on things? And I think they got my vibe of being creative and playful, but also focused on the problem solving with the new ideas. And that came about because I think of the clarity and the authenticity over time. There's really just a stronger sense of cohesion and alignment, I think, amongst my surgeons that I work with and the other anesthesiologists and the nurses and even administration. It's like my authenticity kind of gave permission for the others to be more authentic as well. And we get so many more compliments now on our strength as a team, I think, for that reason as well. I think letting that innovative, outside the box trickster energy kind of the fairy system, let it do its thing, it really helped with some of the stuck in systems. Hospitals tend to have that a lot of times, sort of outdated protocols. And we can just bring in this fresh air. So I could just be like, poke, poke, poke. Let's bring this like fresh thing. I have these ideas from this place and this place, or why not try this thing? So there just seems to be a lot more alignment there, I think.
I love how beautifully you're illustrating this point that I think we bring across in every episode, which is your authenticity is like, it's the biggest win for everybody. Like you being your authentic fairy self is such a win for the whole hospital, for instance. It's so beautiful, especially when the hospital environment is so dominated by like elves or dwarves, or like the nurses are all hobbits. It's like the fellowship is actually where the win really comes in. And I wonder, were there any other light bulb moments?
Yeah, I think another one was, food and the way I was eating was kind of a real light bulb moment early on. I love to talk about that because that's also evolved over time too in kind of a fun way. Well, I've been mostly vegetarian since I was 18, although not as much lately. And that was a kind of yoga response as well as being in the health field. So there was a lot of like yoga health trends. We have to be as healthy as possible with all these little new studies coming out. And of course, the fairy system, it can work really well to be a vegetarian, but Like I don't need a lot of meat. I don't need a lot of heavy proteins and fats. So there was some alignment there. But there was also a lot of kind of shamey, guilty things as well. So fast forward to the podcast, and by then I'm starting to have, I was having some like digestion issues by having too much vegetable, almost too much fiber, a lot of roughage. Those are what the pop health says to do. And so it was giving me a lot of digestion issues. I wasn't really digesting all that roughage, but listening to the podcast and learning about fairies, wanting, they wanted simpler carbs and sugars. So the first thing I did was like cut out this chickpea protein pasta. This is just like the crux of it, and replace it with normal white, high, simple carb pasta. And immediately all the digestion things kind of resolved, It was kind of like my body moves too fast. It doesn't have time to sort through all this deep, fibrous roughage stuff, At least that's the story I have around it. It's like my being needs it to be a little faster. It needs to just be able to absorb it quickly. And so, when I did that, I had those digestion things resolved. The guilt kind of went away, and I was like, oh, this is fine. It is funny, though, because I was thinking about it earlier in the week and my croissant usage. Like, what is the daily maximum number of croissants I can have? Well, there is no maximum, it turns out, for fairies, as long as, of course, they're following the delicious.
I also there's no maximum. I love that light bulb for fairies. There is no maximum croissant daily usage.
Exactly.
Or donut or jelly bean.
Any type of pastry.
No, totally. And like one time this week, I had 2 different ice cream bowls for dinner, and it was so delicious. I felt so nourished and had enough energy to take a run, which I don't do that often. So it's great. It's interesting. There's also this other little pocket in me of like, I think it's always been there a little bit. I have as many donuts or croissants or coffee as I want. I sort of, even within that sort of health crazy thing I had going on for a while, that was always a little bit there. So it was sort of neat to go back and see with the avatars and the fairies, like, oh, that alignment was there a bit. I just over time sort of shamed it out off and on. So, I started to introduce a bit more meat into my diet as well, just to see what would happen. Mostly it confirmed that I still mostly, prefer vegetarian, but I do enjoy and digest actually small amounts of meat. Not really heavy stuff, I guess. So the vegetarian thing's mostly off the table, at least as a concept. It's not a moral stance so much as just like, oh, this is what mostly works for me. I also, over time, sort of realized that I just don't necessarily have the patience for long, big, elaborate meals every night. And so working with Kiran, I found a lot of little hacks and things to make food feel less like a chore. I had this little snack pantry that just has tons of different, quote unquote unhealthy snacks, candies of all kinds, chips, nut mixes, bars, protein shakes, fun Costco snacks. They always have the best cool snacks. And so I just had this rotation of like fun, like fresh snacks all the time. So there's just a little bit more openness and sort of recognizing that I do actually want sugary stuff and need that.
It's fantastic. I love it all. Yeah. So good.
So yeah, it's just been this like nice evolution there. There was a lot of guilt around how I eat, or I ate or didn't eat, shame around that. And a lot of that has just gone away. And the other part of my sort of food evolution, I think, was admitting that I just want pasta all the time. Like, so my pantry and my fridge are just different shapes of pasta, different sauces, different herbs, a little bit of veggies, a lot of fake chicken, lots of cheese. It's basically this little mini pasta bar that's super well stocked. And it just required that I was like, okay, I'm a fairy. I can have a pasta bar for dinner every night. It's great. So now my days off, I also, I can't always quite figure out what I want to do with my time or what I want to eat. So I'll just get in my car and drive around the island, do a little fairy Muna, popping into nice little grocery stores and shops and just finding all like these new ways to make fun pasta dishes. And then, of course, by doing that little Muna, you find yourself like at the beach for a little bit, or going cute little shopping and finding like nice bedding, or singing in the car and looking at the mountains and the ocean on Hawaii. So yeah, it's been part of the journey.
And Muna, for you guys that are listening that aren't aware of this, that's a made-up term that we made up. We make up a lot of words here because sometimes it's hard to language. Like a lot of this stuff is unlanguaged. So Muna what we call that. It's a really specific fairy rhythm that's very meandery. Instead of going from A to B, as I was saying, this is that like A, M, S, Z, B that's really organic for that fairy rhythm, but it totally serves, like, you know, as Anthony's representing here, like on a day off, the Muna is this super lovely, beautiful drive around, singing some songs, looking at scenery, dropping into these little stores and getting all these great pastas. But it really has a big intelligence, because then when you're busy at work, when you're busy on call, it's so amazing to have the diversity of the pasta that you can cook up inside of like 4 or 5 minutes. Or even just like getting the sheets, or getting, you know, like having it all surprise you. It's like all these, it's a side quest that brings all this intelligence and supports and actually populates the main quest. And so with fairies, it's often overlooked. Like, it's like, but there's the main quest, right? Like, but we have to do X, Y, Z. But with fairies, that just, the main quest hides in the background and gets itself so intelligently done in these moon quests. Anyways, Anthony, I just love how your journey to inhabit your avatar blueprint had a lot to do with like, oh, I'm allowed. Like, oh, I'm allowed. And how much shame was there. And I'm just wondering, like, looking back, do you have a sense of what maybe the biggest blocks were? Some of the biggest, like, we call them pain bodies, or we'll say habitual baggage on this podcast, but, you know, bumping up against this reprogramming, what did you discover?
Yep, there's definitely some bumping up. I sort of call them my binary stars of not good enough and abandonment. They're kind of the two main pain bodies that I've been working with, and they're very tightly wound together. You know, at times they're sort of like layers and layers and layers that we've worked through. So I think, you know, certainly the not good enough makes a lot of sense for that elf conditioning. It's like, I can prove I'm good enough. I'm smart enough. I can be faster than other people. I can do all these other things that everyone else can do. And of course, that just puts up a wall to any kind of real connection, either with other people or myself, or even like what your career is supposed to be. You know, there was so much conditioning around not good enough and being a physician that I would get super anxious just going to work. And having to do, you know, relatively simple tasks, or at least by the end of residency, you know, simple tasks for anesthesia. I would get really nervous around just driving to work, or even waking up and starting the day, and, you know, starting to sort of see through some of those layers. It's like, oh, I can just go in and have fun and do this in a fun way. And the fellowship of colleagues will just organically support me. Yeah.
I think there's something remarkable there. I think that's part of the reason people really look to you in this leadership position. They look to you to support their stress, because there you are working in this busy hospital, and, you know, you see a lot of incredibly difficult and challenging things in a hospital, and you're in the OR, so you're looking at some fairly intense surgeries, and especially now in the new position where you've relocated to Hawaii, you know, it's not all retreat and sunny spaces. There's a very needy population on the ground that are challenged in many ways, and that's really in your face daily. And I think that there's just a lot of people in your position working through enormous levels of stress, like right there in your own hospital, like the other doctors and the nurses and the surgeons and whatever. There's just a lot of stress and pressure, and then, like, I think a lot of them are coming to the position from a lot of stress and pressure and even trauma from medical school, from residency, you know, from previous positions. So it's a heavy space, as you've mentioned. And I love that you're saying, like, inside of quite a short period of time, the stress and trauma and pressure reversed itself. And there's now so much more room for your avatar to joyfully sing and dance into the space. And now here you are, as a chief anesthesiologist, but then also many ways that all the other chiefs have sort of put you in their leadership core and are coming to you for support in this really beautiful way, because there's where they'll be truly met or something. And I just think that you're working as a physician on the day-to-day. You do a fair amount of on-call work. It's a small community in Hawaii, and so it's on many hands that you do that. Then you're also working in your chief role. Then you're also working on behalf of other chiefs with the administration and a chief. Like, you're not like, I retired to Hawaii to work only every Wednesday. And this is how I deal with my stress and trauma. I basically barely go into work. You're there, you're working, and you're leading a lot of people with this organic playfulness. And I just love the short turnaround.
Yeah, I think you're right. Inside of it was a pretty short amount of time, a lot of that stress and pressure reversed. I would definitely say the mentorship and your Kiran Trace tools really helped reverse a lot of that into at least a okayness or joy even. I'm singing and dancing and kind of weirdly my position did sort of turn into helping, or evolved into kind of helping these chiefs at other departments, in hospital and the administration. So yeah, you're right. I am sort of busier than I have been in a long time, despite living on Hawaii. And in the past, before I started this authenticity journey, my stress, anxiety, trauma was like, 7, 8, 9 out of 10 some days. Like, I couldn't really even imagine being this engaged without panicking. I really felt like I needed the time off. And I think that's why I initially kind of went to Hawaii. But now in terms of the clinical practice, it's like maximum of 3, most days it's 1 or 2 at the most. It's really quite different. And I think it's just this sort of leftover of being woken up in the middle of the night constantly in residency, and this, slight trauma response every day of like, okay, I got to be on, I got to learn all this stuff, I got to perform for the attendings. But that doesn't really feel quite so intense anymore. I would look at my cases for the next day, and that would be enough to trigger an anxiety response. So yeah, it's just kind of slowly melted away with discovering the authenticity, working with Kiran, the community, and the tools. It's just such a difference. I pull up to the hospital now before a shift, and there's just like this open sense of relaxed fun overall. So I think that's the fairy piece, at least partly, and also just authenticity that would apply to everybody. I'm just going to go play with my friends. I walk in, there's like 40 friends. They're all in different moods every day, but you kind of experience that, there's so many little opportunities for just fun little conversations and snacks. We order food and drinks and coffee all the time. There's this shared playlist that we've all been adding to. And it obviously makes a big difference for the patients too, when you have everybody's just feeling a little lighter, a little bit more present, And on the leadership side, I think a lot of that openness and being myself, people come to me for little issues. How can we solve this little thing or sometimes this big thing? And part of that's just being authentic, I think. I'm not going to give those sort of gaslighty answers or political answers that you might get from administration sometimes. I'm not really necessarily into the sort of typical leadership protocol answers so much. It's just not that interesting to me, and it's not always true either. So there's just this little underlying current of there's a trust there, I think, because of at least attempting to be authentic, and being present with people. And it just feels a bit different now. There's a trust that's available that wasn't necessarily there with all that conditioning. So when that gets removed, it opens up this larger capacity that you didn't really know you had. I certainly didn't know I had. And of course, as a doctor, there's, my expertise as a doctor, and my patients can respect and see that. But all that other stuff was really playing against my capacity to show up, I think. So now it's different. You're just I see the caseload, I'll go get to work, visit everybody, see what they're doing today. going into surgery, like more of the team is like literally walking into the room and smiling, talking to the patient, asking what music they want to play. Everyone's just like having a nice time, even if the patient's anxious. It just having that light team around just makes a difference, I think. So yeah, I think it's better outcomes for the patients, better outcomes for the staff in their roles, less burnout in some ways. So yeah, but now I understand it's like the whole fellowship that matters. There's a lot of times where I've had to just kind of poke little bubbles and I don't have a full solution necessarily as the farrier. Maybe I do, but ultimately that authentic movement of just like changing something or saying this isn't working, or even just having that big spaciousness. Suddenly like 3, 4, 5 people will be involved in this project or this clinical thing, and that's super helpful. Whether it's at the clinical or chief sort of policy level, I'm like, this isn't really working, and then suddenly I poke a few little buttons or poke some bubbles, push some buttons, and it just all gets resolved. The fellowship shows up. And so to me, that feels like life taking care of it, because I didn't have any notion that I needed this person to be here or that I needed this to happen. But by being the fairy and being in that, fellowship space, so to me, that feels like life taking care of it, because I didn't have any notion that I needed this person to be here. But I just, there's enough spaciousness there to let life do that. And I find that there's moments like that almost every day now, I think.
Awesome.
So it sounds like you can talk about the avatar blueprints with your staff as well. Like, do you talk about other people's avatars at work even?
Definitely. I'm 100% out of the closet when it comes to the avatars. I love to talk about it with people, I'll talk about it at work, but I definitely bring it up to my friends and stuff as well. So I'm gonna be like, I'm a fairy. And the nurses like grabbed onto it real quickly. I'm good friends with a lot of the nurses there. They started to kind of, point it out to each other, what avatar they might be. And I did notice it sort of helped with a lot of the relationship between and like the dynamics between the staff there, because you do have different avatars. You have dwarves doing some things, hobbits doing some things. There was even one time, this is sort of a sidebar, but my old chief at one point told me to go wave my fairy magic wand at whatever was coming up that day. So it's like even before I brought it up, people were bringing it up. So it's sort of funny. He had no idea it was a fairy yet at that time, but yeah. But yeah, you can imagine like you have this like really straightforward, like strategic, fast-moving elf in the recovery area, like helping with one patient, and then you have this sort of slightly circular, fluttery kind of fairy nurse doing this other thing, and maybe doing a little side quest, giggling over here, and you could imagine that they may not see eye to eye, like maybe we're not really doing the same thing, right? But if you just sit and talk to them, point out the avatars and kind of where the differences are, then it almost automatically brings in this sort of smoothness, I think. There's like a fluidity to how they interact now and what they expect from each other and how they divide up the task, So there's just like a lot more, it's smoother when there's awareness around those avatars, I think. And the same thing with like some surgeons I've noticed, there's like an elf surgeon and a dwarf surgeon, and they're going to have just slightly different priorities and different ways of going about even doing the same kind of surgery, and I think just pointing that out is enough to make it like, oh, okay, well, here's our overlap, and we can come at it from different angles and overlap in this middle spot. And ultimately, you have different values, but the patient care, that goal of good patient care, is still at the forefront, and even easier when you know your avatar.
It kind of sounds like the ideal hospital. It's like, if I ever have to go to a hospital, please let me be on Kauai. Find Anthony. And when I listen to you, Anthony, there's a sense of, and maybe this sounds like a complete contradiction to some of you fairies out there, but there's a sense of groundedness in your being. Like, you're grounded in your authentic fairiness. And I wonder, would you say that, all the joy and all the play, it is sort of a way for you to ground in your body or to access your body even? Because I know, like for fairies, sometimes it's a little challenging to actually be in this body.
Yes, for sure. For sure, it's like grounding and sort of feeling like being a fairy being in the body can definitely be challenging. But I think the play, the creativity, and especially for me, like singing and dancing, you know, there are such physical movements, kind of using my body as the instrument, letting it do its thing is really, it changed the game for me, actually, on some ways. You know, it really does bring me into the body, even though it's fast and that sort of thing. You know, for like singing, for instance, if I go to sing and there's a lot of Anthony present, then for sure not good enough is going to be singing. It's not going to be great. The lyrics are going to be all over the place, you know? So it's really not that grounding. But if I just drop into the body and start singing, let awareness, let the body sing, you know, suddenly the lyrics are there and they're great. And it knows the appropriate tone and how to move the body. And it just sounds totally different and really alive. And it is being grounded in the body doing that, you know? It's sort of, the singing part is like, I let the motions like come out of certain parts of the body and just let that happen and just let it be there. You wouldn't necessarily associate belting Celine Dion with grounding, but for me, it is like that.
Little sidebar, you decoders. Anthony sang for me the other day in the car, and I have to say, pretty voice, beautiful voice.
Oh, thank you.
That was gorgeous.
Thank you. I don't sing in public very often, so it's nice to hear that.
So courageous of you. And I love, like, what you're saying. Grounding doesn't need to be this, I don't know, walking barefoot on the grass or hugging a tree. It can be whatever your actual being wants it to be. It can be singing to Celine Dion full volume. It's not that one size fits all version of grounding that, you know, we might know from our yoga days, or that's been sold to us at times.
Yeah, exactly. And of course I love the grass. I love the beach and the ocean and all that stuff. But yeah, the grounding doesn't really have to look a certain way, I don't think. And in fact, I don't try to make it look a certain way, it's more grounded. But yeah, it took me a little while to see that, because I think, like in yoga, like you said, and I was in like a non-dual tantric community, and they just talk about everything has to be like grounding in this certain way. But if it has to be like grounded in a certain way, is that really grounded? Like it just seems sort of contradictory, you know? Yeah.
Anthony, this has been so super fun. Love hearing about all of this. I know our fairy community, and obviously our whole community that, you know, loves and knows and is family with fairies is going to be so benefited by listening to all this. It's just permission to like go prance instead of running, you know, exactly. And grab a couple of croissants on the way. And that's not in any way going to prevent you from being like the mover and shaker who's going to get the whole fellowship together and help find the alignment. Like, I just love it. Your authenticity is going to be the door that's going to help support these old crusty rules and structures. And it's been really liberating to hear about it in a hospital setting, because those really are so protocol heavy. So I just want to end up with that really sweet moment you brought up in the beginning where you know, the teacher suggested you go listen to this great non-dual interview, which was me and Angela DeLillo on his Simply Always Awake podcast. He's just a beautiful, beautiful teacher, and he did a wonderful interview with me. And I just love that your teacher's like, you know, don't worry about the last 10 minutes. That part's irrelevant. And it turns out that it was like the most relevant 10 minutes of the interview.
Yeah, for sure. It was so good. It was like perfect. It's exactly what drew me in. Yeah, I love it.
All right, decoders, we will be here again next week.
Lovely to hang with you all today. Thank you so much, Anthony. Everyone's going to be quite benefited by this conversation. And
thank you guys for having me.
Appreciate you. Okay, bye.
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 Bye. Thank you for listening. We obviously love hearing what you think. Your feedback helps us make a better show for you to listen to. So feel free to comment, and you can do it at Facebook, which is the Humans Decoded podcast. And if you're not on social, you can always email any questions to us at outreach@kirantrace.com. And thanks for listening. We love you.